So welcome to the Eastside Freedom Library. This is the very beginning of a new project here, a project of hosting performances of improvised and creative music, and of doing interviews with composers and musicians to help audiences understand what's going on with improvised and creative music. And it's so appropriate that we're beginning this series with our old friend Douglas Ewart, who is a major figure in not only the local, but the Midwest, and not only the Midwest, but nationally and internationally in the creative music scene. So we're going to do this interview and hope to do one a month in anticipation of the concerts that we're also going to be hosting. If you're watching this live or soon, you should know that tomorrow night, Saturday night, the 25th of January, Douglas and Quasar are going to be performing here. And so use this as an appetizer and come on and really hear the music. So welcome, Doug.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. We had the distinct pleasure and privilege of being the first group to play in this transformed library into another kind of library. And ironically, I just came from Pittsburgh, the seat of Andrew Carnegie, who I've got a lot of choice words for. But even when somebody is wicked and evil, which I considered him, good things come from it, because he built a series of libraries, including the first library which I was at yesterday in Pittsburgh. It has an incredible hall, acoustically designed, and I think the library was built before the Carnegie Hall was built. But for Peter and Beth, I applaud and salute them. And I've always endeavored to be supportive of their work, and they of mine and so many others. So it's great. The first libraries that Andrew Carnegie built, at least that one in Pittsburgh, was not a public library. It was for the elite. It had everything in there: swimming pool, sauna, incredible building, and it was saved from the wrecking ball because some people without any vision were going to knock it down, and they would never be able to replace such a building. Yes.
Yeah, we like to say here that we want to thank the immigrant iron miners and coal miners and steel workers that made Andrew Carnegie the rich man that he was, and it was their labor that generated the wealth that paid for this library and 1,000 libraries across the United States that bear Carnegie's name. It's a shame that we don't have the names of the workers to put over the door.
I'm sure we probably could find out some of them.
Yes, yes. So you grew up in Jamaica?
I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, in eastern Kingston, right on the waterfront. I lived maybe 300 yards from the Caribbean Sea, and was fortunate enough that my grandmother's home that we grew up in, her back gate opened into what was the then Scout headquarters in Jamaica, Baden Powell's Scout headquarters, and there was almost 100 acres of land that we were, as children, were able to run up and down in, and there were lots of fields there, tennis courts, baseball, softball, football, which is you call soccer, cricket fields, table tennis, and then right down to the seaside. So we had a wonderful childhood without hovering parents, which I think is how children should grow up, really.
So what kind of music was in the air in your childhood?
You know, the radio stations of that period played everything. We heard Patsy Cline, we heard Charlie Pride, we heard Sarah Vaughan, Charles Parker, Clifford Brown, Bach, Liszt. It was an eclectic programming. So you heard that, and then you had talk programs, because we really only had one radio station. There was a later service called rediffusion, which was you could pay a certain amount each month, like a cable radio in a way, early cable radio. So that was the alternative, but we didn't have that. My father had a shortwave radio, so we could sometimes, when the weather was clear, we could pick up a radio station in Miami. Yeah.
So I've just read what I found to be a really interesting book, a book that historians like me had been waiting for, by someone named Julius Scott, called A Common Wind.
Okay.
And it's about the relationships between enslaved and formerly enslaved people in Jamaica, Cuba, and Haiti.
Yes.
And how ideas of resistance and ideas of freedom circulated around the Caribbean. And I wonder, did you hear as a child music from Cuba and Haiti and other islands?
Oh yes, Jamaica is a pivotal country in the Caribbean, and actually it was a transshipment point for slaves. But just to hint a little bit more about the music while growing up, was we heard the folk music of Jamaica, the liturgical music of Jamaica, the parts of the music that were Afrocentrically influenced, which to me was much more riveting than the European side of it, because of rhythm and because of the emotive aspects of it. But one of the compelling forms of music that I heard as a child that motivated me to want to play was Nyabingi music, which is the liturgical music of the Rastafari movement, which is influenced, of course, by music of Africa. And, you know, Africa, as you know, is the second largest continent, because it's often spoken of as though it's a country. And even on the map, the political representation is quite erroneous, because America should be like a dot, and it's shown as a big thing. But there was a lot of movement between the islands of Haiti and Cuba and Jamaica, and so there are people that Cuba is 90 miles away from Jamaica. So you know, fishermen and would traverse those seas. People went from there. Slaves sometimes escaped from Jamaica to Cuba, because Cuba is 14 times the size of Jamaica. And so you had a lot more possibilities for hiding. And Jamaica, of course, had more possibilities than, say, a place like Trinidad and Barbados, because they're smaller, they're not as mountainous. And so Jamaica had that ability. But there's always been an exchange between those countries, and and during the time of Fidel Castro and Michael Manley, Jamaica had an even closer relationship, which politically scared a lot of people. You know, it's going to be communist and all that sort of rot. I say rot because none of these political systems are without issues, and so I'm scared of democracy too, especially when it's rammed down your throat.
Yeah. Would you say a little more about the Rastafari music? And I think many of us in the States think that it started with Bob Marley.
Oh no.
Yeah, so give us a little bit about the depth of that.
Well, there are different forms that influence Firstly, the Rastafari movement is part of a continuum of persistence. I don't even like the word resistance, and I'm going to tell you why. I don't like resistance because you have to grapple with somebody to resist them. Persistence means you do what you do. No matter what they're doing, you're doing what you have to do to survive, to be free. And so the idea of judo is you don't wrestle with your enemy, you use their energy to dispense of them in an attack, for example. Because sometimes you're not as strong as the person that's trying to subjugate you, but you use your mind and your skills to dispense of their aggression. So although it's a very used term, it's another term that I try to stay away from. I'm into persistence. And now that I've explained to you, maybe you'll continue that. Another term, and I'll get back to your talk, is transparency. We don't need transparency. We had Rodney King on film. We got Sandra Bland on film. What's the brother's name? Orlando Castillo, right? Philando, right? He's on film. What good has it done us? It's clear to us. What we need is truth and justice. If we get that, we don't need all that transparency. I don't want another picture. Just if you give me truth and justice, we're good. But these words to me are deflective. We need transparency. Well, when you look at it, what now? If we have at the foundation of it justice and equality and truth, we're good. So about the Rastafarian movement, it's really part of the whole idea of freedom. And so it's a continuum in terms of there are different movements that are taking place all the time. We have the labor movement, we have civil rights, it's really human rights movement, or freedom, or I call it free wise movement, free and wise. And people are always fighting for that or endeavoring for that, because when we were taken from Africa, immediately your idea is you want to go back to where you were. I mean, you had a life, you had a community. In most cases, you had abundance in your life. So when you're captured and you're subjugated and you're relegated and you're denigrated, it's only natural that you're going to fight for your freedom. And of course, it's not just a physical thing that we're looking at. We're looking at the spiritual, the emotional, and the intellectual aspects. So these movements have taken place. Now, in terms of the Rasta movement itself and its development, it was sparked by a number of things, including Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who was a great intellectual and a visionary. And I have to mention his wives, both the Amy Ashwood and the other Amy. Both his wives are pivotal because both of them help him in terms of the narrative, writing and documenting. And we often just hear about Marcus, but I wanted to interject that. And maybe before we're done, somebody could look up the other Garvey's wife's name for me. Amy Jakes Garvey and Amy Ashwood. Right. These are things that I should remember, but sometimes as you get younger, things kind of get filed away.
especially names.
Yes, but I wanted to mention those two women because we need to bring the women, the scholarship of the women, the persistence of the women, and we all too often just talk about the men. And it's part of, that whole idea that, that the man. And I'm not trying to undermine or underestimate the importance of men, but we also have to do the paralleling. But anyway, Garvey's notion was that there would be a Messiah that would come out of Africa, and Ethiopia was, some of these things are tied to biblical things. Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hand, and so on. And so the crowning of Haile Selassie the First, 1930, was heralded as the return of the Messiah, and so that helped to spark the beginning of the Rasta movement. There are a number of other things that infused the Rasta movement, and it was the thrust of Africa during the 50s and prior, 40s, 50s, but the 50s, it kind of took a greater pivotal trajectory and for independence. And so we had the Mau Mau movement in Kenya under Jomo Kenyatta. Well, he wasn't the only person there. He's one of the named figures, but there are many people, including women and unknown figures, that were important. But the Mau Maus were the people from the Kikuyu tribe that, fought for their freedom, to have their land back. They had their independence. Their independence was taken from them. So I don't even like sometimes how these things are close. They were fighting for their independence. Their independence was stolen. They had it before. So when we say that, and the other one is slaves, that we were made slaves. We weren't slaves. And I also don't want to forget to mention the complicity of Africans in the slave trade, because that's another thing that we avoid talking about, but they were complicit. Anyway, the Rasta movement grew out of this Garvey idea, and other people having ideas before them. I was trying to remember another person, and his name will come to me. But so the movement developed, and what they did was they took songs. They took two forms of drumming that they synthesized into Naibingi. One is called Kumina, and the other one is called Buru. And Buru was a music that was played on plantations. Music is very important, both as a motivating factor for working and as a means of transmitting information in code, and of course making us happy, making jokes about each other. I can talk about you in a way, in a song that you will tolerate, and if I said it speaking, you might be you might not be so nice to me. So song is very important. So Buru was done on the plantation as a way of keeping workers safe, because when you're doing manual labor, there's a rhythmic thing to it, especially if you're building roads, working on quarries, and so on. So Buru was important, but with the demise of the estate and the plantation system, because a lot of people went to, what do you call it? When it's small farming, there's a word for it when it's not on an estate level. Anyway, a lot of people, instead of going back to the plantations, they left. And as a result, the Buru people also migrated to Kingston instead of remaining in the rural areas. So when they came, they brought their drumming with them, and subsistent farming is the word I'm looking for. Subsistent farming, people decided I'd just go out on my own, I wouldn't work for an estate, and some lands were given to freed people because of churches that organized buying land and so on. And some ingenious people that were made slaves saved money because there were systems that were developed where you could sell your things at the market and you give the master so much and you kept some of it, so people stashed away and was able to buy land ingeniously. And women were at the forefront of this. So we have Buru drumming, and then kumina, which is a liturgical music of a religious philosophy called kumina, and between Buru and kumina, you have this synthesis that becomes Nyabingi. And with Nyabingi, you have 3 drums. You have, well, with kumina, you have an instrument called the playing cast and the bandu. And the playing cast does the more intricate kind of playing, and the bandu a more rhythmic holding everything together, much like the clave does in Latin music. And so with Nyabingi, you have the bass drum, the funde, and the repeater. The bass drum doing the heartbeat, the funde doing what would be considered the excited heartbeat, and then the repeater, which also sustains rhythm, but has the prerogative of playing more intricate rhythms, improvising more so. So when I first heard Nyabingi, it is such a powerful, visceral music that you feel strong when you hear it. I can understand why the drums were banned, on top of the fact that many African countries and tribes, you can actually speak. I can actually call your name with the drum. So it's a linguistic aspect aside from the sonic potion that it is.
Thank you. So how old were you when you left Jamaica?
I came to the U.S., I was 17 going on 18. And I had long been interested in playing. I just thought at the time, you know, it would be expensive for me to ask my parents to buy an instrument. I had no idea what they cost, and I never asked. We didn't have music in schools. You had singing and so on, but we didn't have band, at least not where I went to school. And most schools didn't at that time. So when I was in Jamaica, I wanted to play trumpet. And I knew some of the pivotal players in Jamaica, you know, Donald Drummond's, Roland Alfonso, John Moore, just Count Ozzy and the Mystic Revelation of Rastafari, and so on. So Bob Marley came a lot later. And that music that he came out with, its foundation is in Nyabingi, in Kumina, in the Mento, these other older forms of music that can be traced to Africa. But when I was in Jamaica, I used to play tin cans, because we didn't have a drum, but you would modify these tin cans and play on those, mimicking the drumming. And interestingly enough, my grandparents were Garveyites, but people still had a stigma attached to drumming, and she would say, "I don't want any Buru drumming in here." And it's like, what? You know, of course, we never stopped. But I think about that because she was Afrocentric in so many ways, and yet not in terms of the drumming. Which also, I'll give one more antidote and get to that, because the way my mind works is I have to address what comes to it when it happens, and then I move on. The retention is still pretty good. But Marcus Garvey even had issues with our own music and was talking about classical music. I'm like, shut up. But you know, this is the dichotomous nature of being a dispossessed people, where the self-hate is inculcated in numerous ways. Some of them quite, what do you say, surreptitious. It's ubiquitous in terms of, you know, you're being put down on every level. Your lips are too big, your nose is too big, it's like, hey, what? You know, people love thick lips, by the way. But so when I came to the States, I already been listening to a lot of music. I've been listening to, you know, Clifford Brown and Charles Mingus and many of the other artists that I mentioned earlier to you. And so when I graduated from high school, because I didn't play in high school, I began playing. And I was a dropout from Jamaica. I had to go back to school here. I dropped out for many years. Bored with school, and they were bored with me, displeased with me, and so it was a mutual displeasure. Anyway, I bought I wanted to play trumpet, but I'm a autodidactical kind of person. I always figure if I can't teach myself, I don't have the aptitude, which is not a good idea. But I tried the trumpet, and I didn't have much results. And so I bought a saxophone and I started teaching myself. I bought the alto saxophone of Joseph Jarman, who had just recently bought a new Selmer saxophone, and I bought his Boucher alto, and I started teaching myself the fingerings and so on. And then I started taking lessons from him, which he gave me free, by the way, and became a really pivotal mentor for me in so many respects. And so I bought my instrument, I think it was in July, and by October, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, AACM, opened up a free school. And I started studying there with Muhal, Richard Abrams, Roscoe Mitchell, Anthony Braxton. Those were my teachers at that time. It wasn't a long time, but it was so powerful and so comprehensive that it has had I think the biggest impact on me, though I went to other places to study.
And how did you decide in Jamaica that you would go to Chicago?
I made a hovercraft now. My mother came to New York. Her brother got her a plane ticket. She came up on a visitor's visa. She got a job because she needed a job. She had 4 children. My father was a fabulous father as long as he didn't have any responsibility. So my mom came to New York, got a job, and somebody told on her. So when immigration came to her job, it was a lot more civilized then, by the way. They came to you and said, well, Peter, you'll have an appointment next Tuesday. So my mother was working with another woman, a woman from Haiti, who I wish I knew the woman's name now. Never thought to ask my mother that, but these are pivotal or crucial aspects of the story that I would love to know. Well, my father's brother, Uncle Ernest, lived in Chicago, and so the woman from Haiti said, don't you know anybody? You're just going to go back home. You know, your situation, you need this money, blah, blah. So she called my uncle, and my uncle said, well, you know, if you come here, I can get a place for you to reside, and I'm sure that you'll be able to get employment. So she got employment on the underground way, which is the best way is domestic, where you can get paid cash and nobody is asking you about Social Security, and she did that. My mother was a very smart woman, and it didn't take her long to employ a lawyer after she saved her money. And when we came here, we actually had a green card before we landed, you know, to show you how different things were in the 60s.
Yeah. And that was 63?
I came in 63 when I arrived. My mother came in the late 50s. And yeah, so I wound up in Chicago, in the south side of Chicago, in the hotbed of Chicago. I couldn't have gotten to a better place in Chicago, and I'm glad I didn't go to New York. It was good. You know, I had lots of friends from Jamaica in New York, but sometimes it's good to have new territory. You don't have to conform to to old ideas that people may have distilled about you. You can make a new dimension. So I was near Black Panther movement headquarters. I was near Elijah Muhammad. I was near Operation Bread Basket. You name it, you know, and there were lots of, you know, the famous McKee's Lounge, Budland, Trianon Ballroom, Tivoli Theater. This is near 47th Street, where the Regal Theater, where everybody came to the Regal Theater. So I was in a great place. 63rd and 63, 63, I have to think about that. I came to 63rd and Champlain, and I lived, and I came in 63, and then I went to school there, and you know, the AACM was right in that area, and so it was a great transition.
So how did the musical vocabulary that you brought with you from Jamaica intersect with the musical vocabulary that Muhal Richard Abrams and Joseph Jarman and the AACM were creating?
I think the intersection is again part of the continuum. You know, there's this fallacy that jazz developed in New Orleans, rubbish, in my estimation, from my standpoint. First of all, the Caribbean was there 100 years before people started coming to North America as slaves. We started about 1511, 1517 in that spectrum of time. And there was transshipment of peoples from the Caribbean that came to North America. So you'd often go there. They'd even have what was called a breaking in period, where you would stay there, climatized and so on, and then come up.
Get exposed to disease.
Everything.
Yep.
And breaking your spirit, if they could.
Yeah.
Many people ran away to the mountains and created maroon communities in Jamaica. But my point is, the music is influenced by people from all over. And it wasn't just people weren't just playing music in New Orleans. They said New York is a hotbed of musicians. It's true. Chicago is a hotbed of musicians. But check out where those musicians come from. Kansas City, Oklahoma, Texas. It's all over. So I don't espouse to that sort of rock. And you know, you only know what you know. You know, it's like when someone says, "You're the greatest librarian." Well, have you met all the librarians? How you know? You know, but we just regurgitate these things, and they get written over and over, and they become, you know, they become, what they call them, false
narrative.
False narrative, or they have another one.
Alternative
facts. They become alternative facts. And so, you know, we have the similar thing about people. You know, if you don't become exposed to people, you might say, oh, you know, these people, they don't have any ambition, they don't do this, they don't do that. 99.5% you're being fed incorrectly. And we don't know each other often, and that's why these things can parade themselves around as truth. So when I came, I wanted to play, and actually I studied tailoring at the vocational school I attended, and I was employed as a tailor, and that summer of '67, when I bought my saxophone, before the summer was over, I told my folks I was going to be a musician, and they were like, "No, how you gonna eat? What's going to happen to you?" And at first I could understand their consternation, but they saw how absolutely devoted I was to the notion, and as they say, the rest is history. I just jumped in, as Charles Mingus say, I was all in, and I studied, and I started a band with some twin brothers, Michael and Philip. They changed their names to Musra and Cosmic, but their names were Cooper, Philip and Michael Cooper. And we used to practice together. We went to the AACM school together, and we started the Cosmic Musicians. And we used to play in coffee shops and so on. We could barely blow our nose, but we were so fired up. The passion was great.
And the passion was for
To play original music,
Uh-huh.
because AACM had really influenced us so greatly. The idea, we did learn tunes, part of the continuum of, you learn what's called tin pan alley tunes, you learn these forms. But after a short while, I didn't think I really wanted to do that. And the AACM's emphasis on being yourself, finding your voice, was so all-consuming. And as we went to the school, composition was not a thing apart. Like a lot of times when you go to traditional schools, you got to go for so many years, then you got to study theory. It's like dribbling down to you. And we were learning to play the instrument, we were learning composition. It was simultaneous. You were learning theory. I went to school, I studied at Loop College, now Harold Washington College, with James Mack, who's a formidable composer, arranger, band leader. He played incredible flute, and I studied Buxtehude and Fuchs and all of these, Bach, Bird. He looked at everything, choral music, and I was going to AACM at the same time. I eventually went to Vandercook School of Music and studied electronic music at Governor State University, and I was making. I decided I didn't like sitting in a shop, being a tailor all day. Maybe making my own stuff for me, but working as a tailor just lost its fervor rather swiftly. So what I did was, in order not to have a regular job, which was another big drive for me, was not to. After you work for a couple of people, most of the time you're just like, is this what my life is going to be? Reporting to somebody? That's such a, no. So I did art fairs. I began my experiments making flutes, and it was the 60s and 70s, handmade items there was a great emphasis on that. And so I made briefcases and wallets and harnesses for saxophone players or wind players. I even modified some for kora people. If you wanted something, I made covers for for boom boxes, all out of leather. The idea was to be able to make a living. You know, I had a part-time job, but I've never had a full-time job outside of doing my own work, and that was my original intent in becoming a tailor was that someday I would have my own tailor shop. So that motivation was always there. And you know, I grew up in a culture where we made all our toys, or 99% of them. When you got something, if anybody would buy you something, it was very rare. So we made our own scooters, we made our trucks, we made our own kites, we made our own bats, balls, you name it. Oil used to come in these beautiful tins. We'd cut the tins open, make the fender, make the antenna, make everything. Scooters, we'd make our own slingshots, get old bicycle tubes were the thing then, so you'd cut up tubes and you'd look for a crook from a tree, or somebody might have access to a shop and cut a crook out for you. So making things, we made our own tops, which I've now gone back to using as a way of teaching physics. So no part of you needs to be divested that's positive. It just grows into something else. So yeah, yeah.
I mean, listening to you, I think of this wonderful book by a historian named Michael Denning called The Cultural Front, and it's about the emergence of radical culture in the 1930s. But there's a chapter on Elizabeth Hawes, who was a clothing designer for film and dance performances. There's a chapter on dance, there's a chapter on music.
I gotta get that book.
The idea, and I think that, you know, this being a cultural producer.
Yes.
And because it's interesting to me, we have, Beth and I and Clarence also, we've admired your clothing. And you know, this dude makes his own clothes, and I'd never heard the story that
yes,
you were educated
tailoring
as a tailor.
Yeah.
And of course, here we are at the Eastside Freedom Library, where we have Fred Ho's books. And I remember when we started to catalog Fred's books, and one of the catalogers opened a box and said, well, there's all these clothing design books in here. Why did Fred Ho, the musician, well, Fred made his own clothes. And so there's a kind of, I can understand your relationship to the world.
Yes.
Is a relationship of making and doing. And the music that you make and the instruments that you make to make that music are part of that whole stance.
Yes.
Towards the world.
You know, when I was coming up, I didn't realize how fortunate I was. I mean, not that you ever equated that. You just felt like this is a good life. But we didn't have a refrigerator, which I thought at the time, wow, you know, we don't have a refrigerator. Oh, is we? But we were eating fresh food every day. There was nothing that was. I could count the number of things that we got from a can, and no frozen food. And leftovers might last a day because of the heat. Things spoil rapidly, so they would just cook enough for you to have that day, and then the next day, it's all from scratch. And so you grow up with this incredible food, and my grandmother and her daughters, my mom and my aunt, they knew about good food. And you know, organic is now a thing, but organic was, everybody was organic. You use fowl manure or goat's manure or cow manure. There wasn't any synthetic stuff. You weren't, you know, you dig up the soil, you mix that stuff in, and things grew. We had our own chickens. We weren't eating anything on steroids. And so it was a fabulous childhood when look back to it. And I grew up on a street where I never heard my folks quarreling with anybody. If they said anything about a neighbor that was negative, it was so fleeting. And they would say, boy, don't mind your own business. You know, they might say, boy, that Mr. Mackey can be a, and they see you and they stop. Because they weren't trying to create any kind of hate. But you know, just how we even say that about each other. Boy, that Peter, I tell you, he's a good guy, but man, you know, whoever it is, somebody got something that they don't like or that they love about you, both. So growing up in that environment was really great. And growing up with tailor-made clothes, people, you know, sewed, and your parents sent you to somebody that sewed. That's how you got things. I think part of when I started wearing clothing outside of that was when barrels started being shipped to Jamaica, which took control of our economy in a great way, because that meant dressmakers and tailors began to lose their customers. And in fact, that's how many countries are destabilized today, because the United States subsidize our farmers, and they can dump food in places like Jamaica and Haiti to where the farmers there can't compete with imported food because they're subsidized sometimes over 100%. So let's say, for example, onions are 19 cents a pound from the United States. In Jamaica, they might have to sell it for 30 cents a pound in order to break even. And you're talking about just the farmland that we have here is just incredible. It's flat. You're talking about hills and stones and all of that. You're not talking about alluvial plains. So these are some of the things that Americans don't understand. And so when you hear, you know, this is the greatest country in the world, there's no question that this is a magnificent country. But it's not the greatest country in the world. How you equate that? What are you talking about? And people say, oh, well, you know, people that moved from slavery to senators. They did that all over the place. What are you talking about? It's about 11th in terms of income per capita. We can go on. Who has the highest incarceration rate in the world? Who has one of the highest suicide rates? Who has the greatest mass shooting rate? And the other day I was looking at the television and I saw tens of thousands of people walking around with these big guns and, you know, gotta have my gun. What? The kids, we've lost so many children, and there's no notion of sobriety, of logic. The kids are shooting each other over nothing. You diss me. So what? Come on. A man the other day, some kids threw some snowballs and hit a car, and the man shot the children. What? And people are still, you need a gun. You need a gun. And not just any gun. You got to have a machine gun. There's a kind of lunacy that exists here that, and it's promulgated from, to me, the way that the government behaves comes to where what the kids do. If I don't agree with you and I'm bigger than you, I beat you up. And so I can understand why little nations want to have an atomic weapon. I'm not for any of this. I want them to dismantle all of it. But I can understand Kim Jong-un. You know, he's not any more a lunatic than Donald Trump.
Certainly not. So let me, I think I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I want to see if folk that are sitting here might have questions. But this is a big one. So if we go back to your concept of persistence,
Yes.
in contrast to resistance,
Yes.
and we think about your description that I'm calling being a stance of being a doer, of creating
Yes.
in the United States. And so, how does your music express those elements?
Well, it expresses itself in this way, that you accumulate as much knowledge about the world as possible, and that you are trying to improve yourself. I think you have to start with yourself, whether you're an artist or whatever. And of course, we know that all of us are products of a community, that a community builds the individual, and individuals build the community. We need people that are strong, and that you are immovable on some aspects of. That's what integrity means to me, is that even if everybody in here says, well, you know, we should beat up so-and-so, I'm like, well, why? And I say, you're the only one asking why. Yeah, I am, and I'm going to ask why. And I think that we have to take those kinds of stance. I think it's important. Muhal Richard Abrams used to emphasize individuality, and he is such a fervent exponent of that notion. I'm a big community person. However, I understand, remember earlier when I said I was glad I came to Chicago and I didn't go to New York, because I might have ran with some of the people that I ran with earlier, and many of them, unfortunately, didn't live to see 30, because they got caught in a vortex of sometimes friends and the paradigm of your environment, what you're doing. Your parents will say to you, show me your company, I tell you who you are. Those things are really important. So I think learning as much as you can, gathering these ideas from other cultures, and not looking at any culture as subservient or beneath you, or that you really know, that you're sophisticated beyond them. You'll be surprised when you start looking into other cultures, how complicated it really is. And that complication is really simplicity. When you see the best designs, it means that people have stripped away all the trappings of making a good chair, a functional one. I know about artistic chairs. Many of them, you can't sit on them for more than 2 minutes. But that's what I mean. And at the same time, not being so anti-community that you can't see when it's time for you to give up some of your individual thing, like the right to bear arms. We were talking about slingshots, basically, muskets. The right to bear arms. Who are you going to fight? The government? They just bring 2 tanks and put them on you. We've seen it. The move people in Philadelphia. We've seen it happen in Oklahoma. I mean, you could just. What was that? The one where, what's the guy's name? Anyway, Waco, wherever you go, whatever you want to look at, whether the people are wrong or right. I'm just saying you can't fight the government if it's going to be a war. So the idea of the right to bear arms is a fallacy in my estimation, and one in which the danger to the citizenry has become so pronounced to us that only a deaf and blind person is not seeing it. And I'm for seizing all guns, but I'm not going that far because I know most people can't handle that. I don't have a gun, I don't want one. Now, if we were going to have a situation where it's life and death, the rise of Hitler, maybe the rise of Donald Trump, we may have to get a gun. But until then, I'm good.
But I don't want to let you off the hook.
Yes.
Of my
Don't let me off the hook.
Let me ask another way. You said early on that the drums in Jamaica,
Yes.
that you could say things to people through the drums that you couldn't say directly.
Yes.
What do you say through your music that you want us to hear?
I want you to hear some of the things I'm discussing with you now. The inequality, the idea that colonialism is at the seat of a lot of the disparities that are taking place on a global level, the rape and ravishment of the planet, the idea of people being richer than other people, the idea that clothes and trappings make the people. By the way, I collect a lot of things, but I'd be willing to give away, and I do give away things all the time. The point is, my grandmother, one of my grandmothers, both my grandmothers lived to this credo. They say if you have enough to share. If you have enough to share. So if you have a biscuit, you have enough to give somebody a piece of it. And I think that's what I'm trying to really say in my work as an artist, both as a musician, as an environmentalist. I grew up in that, where you really didn't throw things away. You transformed them into something else. People didn't throw away old pots. There were people skilled enough to cut off the bottom of your old pot and put a new bottom on it. I mean, you know, we've lost some of these skills, and we've lost the drive to do this because of cheap labor, slave labor, dollar stores, and we're all complicit in it. It's virtually impossible not to be, because we buy clothing made in blood shops. I won't call them sweatshops, they're blood shops. People bleeding, people are compelled to work, and this whole notion that you're better than other people because you have the means to buy something, or we live in America, God bless America. I guess if there's a God, he must have blessed the whole world. What's up? What up? You know, it's like, some of these things to me belong at a ball game. They don't belong in the national conference anymore. And with that notion, for example, the things that I want people to feel from my music is that instead of building a wall that costs so many $1 billion, what would it be like if that money was distributed to some of the people that are coming across the border? They don't want to come to North America, believe me, because it's sunshine, you can live easier, it doesn't require heat, and so on and so on. What if we did that? Or what about giving $1 billion to the Native American community all over the country to make a transformation in housing and education? But people are stupid enough to fall for this. We're going to spend at least $20 billion to build a wall that the moment it's built, it becomes obsolete because people traverse that. And the fact is that most people that come in here don't cross the border that way. They don't cross the border to come in here. So that kind of illogical madness is something that you can only talk to that if people still buy the idea of white inferiority complex is what I call it. They call it white supremacy. I call it white inferiority complex, because if you feel superior, you don't need to do anything like that. Well, you shouldn't be thinking you're superior anyway. But my notion is the people that stalk people are people that want to control them. You know, you have a love relationship, the person won't let you be yourself. You gotta always know where you are. They gotta phone you. You can't go here. That dress ain't there. So to me, that's the part of the crux of imperialism and colonialism. And you look at old movies and you see how other ethnic groups are portrayed. And you look at, the Welsh, what are the people from the Iron Range? I was trying to...
Finns and Croatians and Serbs.
The Finns. The Finns were so discriminated against. They couldn't live certain places. They couldn't work certain places. They were like black people. And that's why some of them are so understanding, is that they couldn't live, they couldn't get certain work. And so so we see that whiteness is a construct, but it's a construct that people have benefited from, and people don't readily give up privileges even when they're unequal and dangerous and wicked and stupid and all those things. But if you can get a better loaf of bread, you can live somewhere else and all this, then you don't. And people don't want to hear it. People don't want to hear it. And then we have the other part that I want people to know from my work is that Native peoples and black people need to get their stuff together and stop, Latinos, poor white folks. We need to come together. And, there's a story about Wilmington, North Carolina that all of you should look at, because black people and white folks and everybody that lived there had a unity, and people that saw that worked and destroyed it. Got all the black people out of the town that were doctors, lawyers, owned land, was on the police force, people in government, literally. And what's the guy? Taft. It was during his time, 1896, 1898 in there. Anyway, that's what a lot of my work is about. And my work is also about joy and meditation and relaxation and, jokes. Having fun, but I have a serious side in my work that I want people to get, and that is that the musicians and artists have a responsibility to the community that has supported us, and to say strident things, because if we don't make a stand, who is? And we have a platform to do it, because hundreds, sometimes tens of thousands we're playing to at once. And then about what I wear, that's also part of a statement. And on my coats are painted people that I respect, like Fannie Lou Hamer, Lausanne from the Apache people, Ida B. Wells, my aunt, who was an early politician, the first woman mayor in Jamaica. And at first I was just painting different things, and I thought, this is the perfect canvas. And then people ask me, who are these people? And we get to talk about these people. There's a Chinese woman who I have to remember, I'll make better note of her name, but she exposed the fact that tainted blood was being, aged tainted blood was being given to people deliberately in transfusions. Much like the Tuskegee experiments. And it's not experiments, the Tuskegee deliberate murdering of people, slow death. And when we say words like experiments and exploring, it softens what we should say about it, I'll come back to you. One last thing, we went to Bordeaux recently, and we were going through the museum, and the main curator, I think she's still angry at me, although I've written to her to say, I just think we have to change the language. She was saying they went on expeditions. I'm like, what expedition? You come, you see my stuff, and I want to keep it clean because I'm prompted to say some expletives, but children might be hearing this. And so she said, exploration, expedition. I say, you need to say invasion, because when somebody welcomes you to their house and then you take it over, what? And I do an experiment with my students. When they go to lunch break, I take all their bags and I hide it. When they come back, they say, Professor, where's my stuff? I say, stuff been discovered. And it comes to them, because when they write papers, they keep putting this discover thing in there. I said, stop saying that. Just like I'm saying to you, I have a poem that I'm not a minority. I don't own 10 acres on Martha's Vineyards. I don't drive a Maserati. I don't drive a Ferrari. I'm not that's a minority. I'm not from a developing nation. We did not invent napalm, Agent Orange, the atom bomb. I'm taking a different perspective on what development means. The places that are the most so-called underdeveloped are the places that we're hoping we can maintain, because they didn't put up any big buildings or anything and chop down all these trees to make concrete jungles. Now, don't misunderstand me that I don't like modern developments, but we've gone, just like when I was talking a while ago about the new technologies have their place, but we've gone too far with them without thinking about the ramifications of it. So that's what my work is about. And these philosophies didn't all come together at once, but from reading, from going to see other artists do things, from painting, the imperative now of us talking about saving the planet, ecology. Here we have a guy in the White House that's denying that we have in climate change. Any idiot can see that. You might not I stopped arguing about climate change. They say, I call it, what do they call it? When you're
Denialist.
climate change. What do they call climate change?
Global warming.
Global warming. Thank you. I say, we ain't gonna argue about that. Let's argue about this. There's global harming. There's global harming. So if you don't want to acknowledge the warming part, we ain't got no argument there. But too much stuff being spewed in the air, all you have to do is lock one car in this building and we'll all die. So if that doesn't bring a message to you, you're stupid. And not the good stupid. We have a stupid, they would say. When you do something good, they say, you're stupid. That's different. You're stupid.
So, would anyone like to ask Douglas a question? Yes. Do you want to grab, should I move the microphone, Carl?
Just speak loud.
Speak loud.
All right, I'll try to speak loudly. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Douglas. I appreciate your words. I wanted to ask you, well, there are a couple things. I recently was reading about Marshall Allen, who
Yes.
is the music director of Orchestra,
Yes.
Sunrise
Yes.
director. And he talked about a couple beautiful quotes. One was that he said, when you're making music, you affect people's destiny.
Okay.
And the other was, music is dangerous.
Yes.
It can turn against you.
Yes.
You just talked about your music. I'm wondering how you might think about the ways in which music and what you do affects people's destiny, and how music as a practitioner can turn possibly against you.
Well, I don't know how many of you know the video by Busta Rhymes. It talks about, get out on the floor, show me what you're working with. Some of you might know that particular piece. But the piece was about women being subservient and kind of serving you sexually as a man. And I ran an experiment with my class. I took the music out of, first you play it with the music, and people are dancing and jumping to it. And when you take away the music and it's just the talk, within seconds they're asking you to turn it off. So an impalatable concept can be made palatable with music, and it can draw you in. And the Germans knew that. They experimented with low frequency sounds because it hits you here and spreads out throughout your body. Higher frequencies hit you in the head. Not that both can be used very effectively. In fact, they've even used them as weapons now, that they can bring loudspeakers into this area, and you and I would have to run for cover. We can't just cover our ears. The vibration to the body is there. I don't know necessarily about destiny, but I suppose one's future, what you listen to, can definitely affect you. And the same way that I just described about that piece, show me what you're working with, that music is very powerful. It doesn't have to have lyrics. Just the sound, the same sound that can get us like this can also get you doing this. Yes, the music can affect your destiny in terms of your future. What is your future? How are we using music? What, when I look at the Grammys, for example, I'm not all that enamored with, like people are like, well, they got a Grammy. I'm like, what? It's a pass, like an Oscar. It's probably something, Marlon Brando gave his back. There are people that realize, yes, you want to commend your colleagues and your contemporaries, but sometimes these things, the new word is weaponized. Sometimes these things are dangerous because they're giving nods to things that are like dribble. and it's like popularity, because people are saying yes about guns. We don't have to enter that chorus. What about all the people that are being killed every day almost? We have a mass shooting in America. It happens nowhere else. Maybe Mexico. And most of those people, at least you might be able to say it's poverty. Here, some of it is so unfounded. Indiscipline is a big part of it. The way parents deal with their children or not deal with their children. And not, the kids aren't being embraced. When I was a child, I felt loved not only by my family or people that knew me, but people that saw you in the street. And if you were conducting yourself a certain way, they would pull you up. It's like, hey, you want me to call your grandmother? That would be neat to say. Now if you say that, they start telling you. I'll give you an antidote. I was sitting on the porch in Woodlawn, in Englewood in Chicago, and a woman, we heard this cursing. I thought, oh, two grown people having it out, they walking together. So we sit there. When the woman comes alongside us, it's a baby in the stroller, getting all kinds of M's and F's and so on. So I said, hey sister, why are you talking to, it's just a baby, maybe 2. And she parked her stroller and began to give me the business. And she wasn't satisfied with that when she couldn't get a ride. She commenced to open the gate and come into the yard. My friend had to jump up, close his gate to prevent her from coming in. Now she's left her baby unattended to come to confront me about saying to her, why are you speaking to a child this way? Because you can imagine, that's music. That is music. How you talk to the child is music. If you're saying pleasant things, if the vibe is good, we know instinctively when it's a good vibration and a bad vibration. So we live in on vibration. We're a vibration. She was not satisfied with having the gate closed, so now she's going to elicit the help of her friends. And she called them and said, these 2 Jamaicans are effing with me, as though we had attacked her. Fortunately, and I was saying to myself, now what did I get in? Because I'm going to be leaving here soon, and this man has to live here with his family. And all I was trying to do was get her to say, oh, my bad, or, just, we could talk to each other. But that's destiny. And what a parent, a mother especially, says to a child infuses a certain kind of conduct. And that's why I could never think of being rude to my mother, especially my mother, or my father, even though we weren't as tight as my mother. One time when I was 21, and I was still living at home, I was talking to my mother and I raised my voice beyond the decibel level that she thought acceptable. And she got her skillet and smacked me with it. I did not get, I was a little pissed, but I didn't knock the chair over. I excused myself from the table and I walked around the block and I thought, maybe it's time for me. Maybe it's time for me to be getting my own. Maybe this is part of it. This is, you know. My point is, I never cursed or got even mad at my mother enough to knock the chair over as protest about being struck as a so-called grown man. And it's because of how I was raised, with boundaries about things. And that when certain people talk to you, there's a certain kind of respect you have. Just like we never fought as friends. Never. We wouldn't allow each other to fight. If we saw something getting, we'd be like, hey guys, let's just cool it. You should probably go home, and then the next day, it's all done. We should be able to have that kind of influence on each other instead of, you know, somebody says something to you, they diss you. There's no tolerance. There's no coexistence. I don't even like tolerance for some things. You have to go beyond tolerance. Coexistence. That we all get mad. You know, like people get mad. You get mad in the street. These are the things that I'm hoping my music talks about. It talks about, on some of my album covers, I talk about water conservation. Because here, you don't have to carry water. I've had to carry water. I lived in Africa for 3 months, and although it wasn't a long distance, and when I left my folks' house in Jamaica thinking I was a little man, I went to live in the hills with the Roscoes. I had to carry water for over a mile. 5 gallons carry water, you see what it's like. It's about 8 something, almost 9 pounds for a gallon. So if you're carrying like 5 gallons, you're carrying some weight. And you don't have a cover to the container, so you have to learn how to walk so it doesn't splash out. But we waste water. People are running the water the whole time they're washing dishes. And it's not running slow, it's running at full tilt. When you run water at full tilt, most of it goes past your hand. So these are the kinds of things that I'm hoping in my discussion, that's why I'm talking about it, is that somebody will hear it just as I've heard things that's put me in check and made me think more. And even though I grew up carrying water, sometimes I have to say, hey, you just washed that and you had the thing full tilt. What? You have to put your own self-interrogation is a crucial aspect to new governance of systems out of control.
Anyone else want to ask a question?
I don't know.
Julian?
There was the other question, but
No, let's bring it.
The other one was really about, as a practitioner, music is dangerous.
Yeah, music is dangerous in the sense.
And it can turn against you.
Yeah.
Has music turned against you in the process of making it?
Well, I suppose it could turn against you in this way. One way is if you think you're all that, and you think you're due for some recognitions that sometimes aren't forthcoming. I think humility is an important aspect, and that there are plenty of really fantastic artists that needs recognition just like you. So sometimes you don't get something, you might be disturbed for a day or two, but put it on let go quick and keep going. Keep doing what you do. In due season you will be recognized, and in some ways, in some provinces, you'll never be recognized. And then in other ways, you are recognized. For example, sometimes I hear from a student that I had 10 years ago, that when I was saying stuff to them, they looked like they weren't interested or wasn't even listening, and they'll write to you and say, you know, Professor, this is what I'm doing now as a result of what you said to me. So there are different kinds of accolades that one receives. Music can turn against you in the sense that we know how pliable it can make us, how vulnerable music can make us. That music can also have that sentimental kind of effect on you, that sometimes you shouldn't be listening to that because it's that powerful. And so maybe you should be listening to some Fela, or you know, or some music from the Caribbean, or maybe you should be listening to a Chopin nocturne to get you in a different space and frame of mind. Or you should hear some music from Burma, you know, instead of saying, "Oh, I don't like that." You ain't heard it. What? You know. So I don't. Oh, here's one issue that I sometimes have with my students from different ethnicities. I'll say, well, you know, Jim Kin is Korean. Oh, Korean, Chinese, Japanese, what? I say, they're very different. They look alike to me. I said, that's what people say about you. You know, so we have these biases, but we don't put each other in check, especially when we're in a homogeneous situation, when we're in one where the ethnicities are with us, or we don't want to go against the grain. But you have to put people in check. I was out one day, and the guys, the Hebrew Israelites, was talking about white devils. Well, there was a little girl that she was the only white person there, and she was, I don't know, 6, 7. So I said to them, hey, what? There's a little girl here. I know black devils. Well, that's not what we're talking about now. I said, well, you need to mention them, because you look like you're just directing your hostility to this one person that has nothing to do with anything. She's so innocent, she's not even fully comprehending. So that kind of consciousness, I'm not saying that, you know, the system, the white system, is a very diabolical one, the one that embraces the idea of whiteness as being superior to everything, is a dangerous one. But by the same token, you have to be careful about your critique and who you're critiquing to, and how you're making that criticism as though it's, you know, just one person. And think about the Welsh people and the camaraderie they found with Paul Robeson. And when Paul Robeson was barred from traveling, they were incensed and appealed to the government to give him back his thing. And people were like, that's Welsh. They said, well, yeah, they're workers. They're the people in coal mines. They died from black lung, just like black people died from black lung, just like Appalachian people. Or people would say, oh, they're Appalachian whites. Well, interestingly enough, black people used to walk through Appalachia as one of the safe routes to get away from slavery. We don't know a lot of stuff because we don't read. And as a result of that, we're one of the most ignorant nations on the planet with access galore. So that's what I'm interested in. Those are the things. And of course, everybody that knows me knows I can be completely silly. And love to do it. I always, sometimes I'm messing with Peter and he's probably like, man, I got work to do. But I don't care. I'm just like, yeah, Peter, this is the library police. Where are you going to get me a book? You know, something like that. But those are some of my interests, and children are a big part of what has made me develop into an artist where you develop a good flak jacket when you have to perform or do things with children because they are pretty naked with the truth. Yeah.
Julian, did you want to ask a question?
All I would have to say would be that your music and your presence has definitely altered my destiny in a positive way. So that's all I have to say about that.
I appreciate that very much. I'm humbled by it, and I feel so fortunate that I have a life that, you know, during the time when you're making, people call it a sacrifice, but it's just what you do. You know, when you want to do certain things, if you want to become a pilot, you have to go through certain kind of training. Is that a sacrifice? No, it's what you have to do to become a pilot. You want to be a good musician, you got good musician, you have to practice. You need to be with people that are your equal, and you need to be with people that are better than you, because it lifts you up. And you need, and all of us need nods. Anybody that wants to say, well, I can live by myself. Sometimes I say I want to live with the trees, and I do, because humans can be so weird. But at the same time, everybody knows I'm like a real social. I wouldn't last too long out there alone, maybe for some months, but I wouldn't want to do it indefinitely, because I love the interaction with people. And it's so important to our health. And I think that's one of the reasons that we have a lot of the shootings that we do, is that people aren't embraced. They're not being stroked properly. We're not loving ourselves. And I have a little saying, I love myself. It's not my saying. It comes from a Buddhist book called Shout. And it says, I love myself, I love the human spirit. I love the human spirit. And this might be one way that you can think of it, but one of the things I love about humans is if you try to compartmentalize them, if you try to give them like a forbidden thing, like love. I think about lovers. Like you'll see somebody and they'll say, well, you're not supposed to associate with Hmong people. And invariably, a Hmong woman sees you and you see her, and it's like, hey. And other people will shield you so that you can have this rendezvous. That's the human spirit that I love, the one that transcends that kind of unnecessary wall, that unnecessary boundary. And it's what we really have to work towards. There's a lot of things that we need to clean up in the interim, but that's one aspect of the character of humanity that I love about people. And yeah.
Well, I think we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank you, Douglas, and thank you all for coming in on Friday afternoon. Urge you and everybody who might look at this video to come tomorrow night and hear the music. 8 o'clock, Saturday night the 25th, here at the Eastside Freedom Library. Thank you so much, Douglas, for sharing.
We want no standing room. we want people to have to come back, but to say that what you and Beth have done is phenomenal, like putting your life on the line in so many respects, both in the giving of yourself and investing what little savings you guys have into this notion, and that's a sweet surrender. That's a sweet surrender.
It is, and you get so much back.
Yes.
So much back for it.
But it's so important to say it to you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
See you soon. Thank you.